Hi, friends. Welcome to episode 351 of School Librarians United. I am your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian in my 19th year, I knew I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. Now is a perfect time to mention that all the ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast by myself, my interview guests, and listeners who reach out to the podcast are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. When incorporating research, I always make sure to cite my sources. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast has something for you. I welcome you and all listeners to reach out with your feedback and episode suggestions. You can reach me on Facebook, on X, formerly known as Twitter. My handle is at @LMS_United. On Threads and Instagram, you can find me at School Librarians United and on Bluesky at SLU Podcast or the email address schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. If you include your mailing address, I'll be sure to send you a podcast sticker. And now for today's episode, Unrestricted Checkout and Book Policies, and my conversation with Maura Madigan and Kim Siegel. Friends, I'm so excited. You are in for a treat. We've got not one, but two experts to bring to us a great deal to think about when it comes to our profession. Maura Madigan, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you, Amy. It's great to be back.
You know, listeners who are meeting you for the very first time, would you introduce yourself, tell us about the library, the grades you serve, and some of the programs that you offer?
Sure. My name is Maura Madigan. I'm actually the author of 3 books for school librarians, Learning Centers for School Libraries, Project-Based Learning for Elementary Grades, and School Librarian's Guide to Almost Everything. I'm also a practicing school librarian in Northern Virginia. I was an elementary school librarian for 10 years, and this year I have transferred. I am now at a secondary school library in the same district, and we serve grades 7 through 12, and I have the pleasure of working with 3 other full-time certified school librarians.
Friends, I got to tell you, I've interviewed a lot of librarians. I've interviewed more than a few who have a partner because there's 2 in their library. The fact that there are 4 of you, there's only a handful of states where that really has become, something that is important when it comes to staffing. And I'm so like that kind of dynamic. I think I said at the time, I don't think my ego could handle it. No. So on October 10th, you and I did discuss your most recent book, The School Librarian's Guide to Almost Everything. And that same day, I learned that you're also quite the talent scout because you emailed me some ideas of future topics. And friends, this is always welcome. And one of the people you suggested and guests to interview is with us today. Maura, would you please let listeners know, how do you happen to know today's co-guest, and that is Kim Siegel?
Sure. Well, Kim was also a school librarian in my district, and then she became the elementary library specialist. So in my county, or my district, we are very fortunate to have educational specialists that are devoted just towards library services. And they work in the central office, and they are fabulous, and they're there to support the very many librarians that we have in our county. So Kim was at first the only elementary level specialist, and then we added a second one. So she would deliver PD. She's always there to support you. And we went to a conference together. We ended up the COVID conference, AASL, in Salt Lake City. And there were not many school librarians from my district there at the time. So we ended up going, and we became very good friends from that point on.
I'm going to say right now, meeting up in person, IRL, it sort of escalates a friendship that would otherwise take a long time. When you only know each other virtually or on that virtual PLN of social media, that we make that connection. But boy, you meet at a conference, and that I liken it to being locked in an elevator for some period of time, because all of a sudden you have no choice but to get together and really connect. And from that point on, you come out of that locked elevator going, I guess we're friends now, huh?
Right. So Kim is actually no longer a librarian or a library specialist, but she is library supportive and library adjacent. And actually, Kim, I'm super proud of her because she is currently working on a book for Bloomsbury Libraries Unlimited.
Outstanding. And Kim, I know you and I are meeting for the very first time, but Bloomsbury is doing me a solid in sending me books that I request. So I'll tell you what, Kim, when that goes to print, you just let them know that Amy Herman's going to be recording an episode with you on that book, and to just send me one. Kim Siegel, thank you for joining us today. I'm so excited. A friend of Maura's is a friend of mine.
Oh, thank you. I'm so excited to be here. I've enjoyed listening to other podcasts you've done.
Well, and let me ask you, because we have an idea. When I was reading some of what you've done, at one point, you were overseeing 142 elementary schools. And that's in one district.
So being the ed specialist for 142 elementary schools was amazing, because I got to go out and visit all of those school libraries and meet the librarians and see them in action and really learn about best practices that then I could bring back to professional development and share with that wider audience. So I think that not only did I get to share those great things, but it made me a better librarian, because it really got me thinking critically about my own practices when I had been an elementary librarian for 10 years. So, and now I have moved from that position. I still work in the school district central curriculum and instruction office, but now I am a sustainability educator. So I support preschool through 12th grades teachers in student-led environmental stewardship actions. So I'm helping them figure out ways that they can incorporate it into their curriculum. Things like nature observation and wildlife habitat building and just recycling and food sharing, things like that. But I still am very much firmly in library world. I lead professional development every once in a while, still with the librarians, and I'm very active in ALA. I'm on, not surprisingly, the Sustain RT board, and also am the AASL rep for USBBY, the United States Board for Books for Young People. And I am writing a book right now called Rooted in Sustainability, and it's about environmental literacy in library instruction. So incorporating environmental education into library lessons and programs, because so many studies show that connecting to the natural world benefits students, not just their cognitive health, but their physical health, their emotional well-being. So I'm sharing ways that librarians can incorporate nature-based learning into their lessons and programs with hands-on activities and projects that intersect with those library standards that we're all supposed to be following. And I'm excited that it's happening in libraries, because when our students observe and learn about nature and take actionable steps, they're like using tools and practicing skills that when they're grown up and they're in charge, they're going to be able to navigate and adapt and really innovate for a sustainable future. So I get to combine my two passions. I love this.
Well, and I'm just all the time, I was like, one of us. It's like you've got this school librarian who's navigating now that you're in a sort of a general population supporting educators writ large, if I'm correct. At your core, you never stop being a school librarian, and it sort of comes out in what you do naturally, which is wonderful. And friends, yes, you can be sure when that book comes out, we'll get a copy, and we'll have to have Kim Siegel back on the show to promote your book and tell us all about the amazing things that librarians can do to incorporate sustainability. And I'm sorry, just isn't this about raising decent human beings? I would like to think that sustainability and that environmental stewardship piece is something that decent human beings would do without specifically being educated on it. And yet, I think in today's society, we need to be very intentional about that instruction, don't you?
Absolutely. And I think that naming and noticing what you're doing helps them really bring it to their core. It makes them who they are. It becomes part of what their, belief system is.
So I'm so looking forward to this conversation, friends. Unrestricted checkout and book policies. This is one of those I'm not allowed to use the word master class, but if we had to have like a best practices series on what are some of those best practices that school librarians, irrespective of grade level, should be incorporating into their sort of overall services that we provide to our students. Unrestricted checkout and book policies. This one hits home on so many levels, and I'm very grateful to have this. Again, I really need to sort of have a best practices playlist because it doesn't matter where you are professionally. I know in doing the research for today's conversation, it really gave me pause and so many opportunities for me to have my mind blown and realize I need to do better. In the 8 seasons of recording conversations with school librarians, I'm going to be honest, I can't ever remember becoming as defensive in my past practice as I have, as when I read the 2 articles that you both co-authored and are linked in today's show notes. Friends, this one you're going to want to print out because I realize when you read something on the screen, that's one experience. But if you are going to engage with the content, I think you owe it to yourself to print these articles out and really immerse yourself in the content that is the questions that are being raised. Because Maura and Kim have clearly done some soul searching when it comes to being school librarians and what are we providing for our students.
So it's interesting that you say that the articles made you defensive. That was not our intention at all in writing these articles. And also we've presented on this topic 3 times at 3 different conferences. So what about it made you defensive, Amy? Here, I'm turning the tables on you.
I'm going to say right off the bat, the fact that I had a section of my library that really I felt you needed to be at least in the 2nd grade before you started exploring. Those were our chapter books. Our chapter books, I really felt like when my kinders, when my littles would head over to the fiction section, I was corralling them with, trying to keep them over on, the fact that we sort of tend to segregate and have a K2, and then you might have a 3-5, breaking those up into very distinct areas of my library, to me was something that made so much sense until you started explaining to me why that might be problematic. So that was one. Another one that was the idea of limiting books if students still have books checked out, really sort of challenged a practice that I didn't think needed challenging because I could not see why that was an issue. So I think providing those sort of arbitrary, because they are arbitrary, creating barriers to access. I think we're going to talk about this also, about the fines. I think for so many of us, when a book comes back and we cannot resurrect it, I think so many of us have felt that the student should learn that's not what we do to books, and therefore the student needs to replace the book or provide the replacement costs of doing so. And I think that until somebody says, except you need to consider, I think that there were some things which I think I had learned, and decades ago when I was in library school. I didn't question them until somebody like the 2 of you put this into a context, and all of a sudden I realized, oh, I see what I was doing. Yeah.
So I think that's your reaction is what we wanted to provoke, not the defensiveness, but checkout is really the most fundamental part of our job. Right? It's what sets us apart from other educators, but it's rarely talked about, right? It's rarely, do you ever hear anybody talking about checkout limits or checkout restrictions or checkout policies? I'm in a lot of Facebook groups, and There's a lot of people talking about how do I get these books back and all of this. And I see Kim wants to chime in. Go ahead, Kim.
I was going to say, at a professional development that I was leaving, we took a poll and we asked the librarians what was the most important part of their job. And they said it was getting the right books into the hands of their students. But there are so many barriers to that happening. And we started looking at what is it that's stopping that from happening? Because there are students in our schools that don't have those books, that don't have, that don't have the opportunity to just choose a book freely and read what they want to. So we started really closely examining what was stopping that from happening.
Right. And I think it's really important for school librarians to hold each other accountable, right? It's important to really reflect on what are you doing, why are you doing it, and to really take your policies and practices out every once in a while and shake them out and look at them in the light and say, are these still serving my community? Both of us, I think, both started out very different, right? So we evolved to this unrestricted checkout philosophy. Just like you, Amy, I cringe at some of the former things that I did and like remembering some of the things that I used to say, so it's not like I've always, been following best practices.
No, but when we know better, we do better, and we try to, certainly. I mean, I love that quote, but we really wanted people to kind of critically examine and see if what their policy was. My policy is that I have open checkout and that students can come check out books. But was that my practice? Not always. So policy and practice don't always match, and it's important to really think about why.
Right. And I think it's super important to always consider your why, right? So for me, the most important part of my job or what I want to achieve is for all of my students to feel like the library is a positive place, to have this positive association, right? School librarians, especially elementary school librarians, are brand ambassadors for all libraries. And I don't think we really appreciate the opportunity, but also the great responsibility we have. Every interaction with a student, whether it's intentional, unintentional, negative, or positive, is going into building their idea of school libraries and then by extension, books and reading for pleasure. So if they have negative experiences, especially in elementary school, when, that's when we have our captive audience. That's when most students are coming to the library each week for regular book checkout. If they don't have a positive experience in elementary school, when they go to middle and high school and they get to choose if and when they visit the library, they're not going to choose it. And you're a high school librarian, right? It is tough to get those kids to come in and check out books.
And if they associate the library with being embarrassed because they were called out for not bringing a book back, or even just had a negative interaction with a librarian, didn't have a positive relationship at all, then they're not going to go there to check out books. But they're also not going to go there when they have research questions, or they're not going to use the resources that we've curated and made available to them as they get older. So I think it's vital, especially in those early years, but it needs to continue into high school. There's nothing worse than being called out for something that you might not have control over. So we don't know what's going on in our students' lives beyond the walls of the building. Maybe they have two homes, maybe they're product of divorce and the books are at the other house. Maybe it's even worse. Maybe they're experiencing homelessness or something like that. I had one student who didn't bring back his books for ages, and I finally asked his older brother, could you help him look for him? And he said, oh, my mom threw those away. And I said, threw those away? Well, later I found out that they had bed bugs, and I thanked that mom in my head so many times, because what if they had brought those back to the library? That would have been disastrous for me. So, thank you, Mom, for thinking. Not, I wish she'd communicated it to me, but we just don't always know, and there's not always a way to know. So just giving the students the benefit of the doubt. Sometimes there are reasons the books don't come back that are beyond their control. And sometimes we want them to grow up to be readers. And one of the things that you can do to become a reader is to have books that you've selected yourself available to you. So as librarians, that's one of our important roles, is to give them that access and opportunity to choose those books.
I don't think that anybody intentionally embarrasses a child. I firmly believe that educators get into education because we love students. We love helping, right? School librarians love books, love reading, love educating students. So nobody's doing this on purpose, right? Nobody sets out to be the mean librarian. But I think it's very easy to, especially when you first become a librarian, I had no idea what I was doing, right? So I just kind of went along with, oh, this is what the previous librarian did. And I was actually lucky in that I followed a school librarian who had unrestricted checkout. And then the person who did Kim's job, Terry Ryle, shout out to Terry Ryle, she really made a hard sell on unrestricted checkout. And I said, okay, that sounds great. However, I thought, how am I going to get these books back, right? So my first year, I had a policy. You could check out as many books as you wanted. Never call it unlimited, by the way. Call it unrestricted. Unlimited suggests like mountains and mountains of books. But if you had 1 or 2 overdue books, you could only check out 1 book. And if you had 3 or more books checked out, you could not check out at all. And in my rational mind, I thought, okay, those kids, they're going to bring the books back the following week. No, it did not have the effect that I intended. What I found was happening is it took a lot of time, because I had to print out before each class came in. I had to print the list of kids who could check out or couldn't check out, and you kids can only check out 1. And then how do you communicate it to them? Well, you call them out in front of the whole class, like, okay, here are the kids who can only check out 1 book this week. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, these are kids, you have too many books checked out, you can't check out. Well, guess what? Then those students I had to entertain them, right? Because they're not looking for books with the rest of the class. So they've been publicly embarrassed. So they're in a bad mood. So they're more likely to misbehave, which did happen. And what I was noticing is there were some kids who would go a month, 2 months without checking out books. So I quickly abandoned that policy because I realized this is just not having the effect that I had hoped.
I'm going to say right now, one of the things that I wanted to, I did a lot of soul searching when I read your article. And I was trying to think back to the first time I heard other ideas like this expressed. Okay. I was like, when was the last time I heard these types of suggestions coming from the library world? And I'm going to tell you right now, my reach for what content is library related. I'm always looking for new ideas to broadcast on this show, and I had not come up against anything that was addressing this specifically. But I do remember the first time somebody suggested unrestricted checkout and really reconsidering your book policies is when the public libraries made this very overt, very public between amnesty days and then just going fine-free. And reading some really compelling arguments that our public library counterparts were spending so much money hiring people to identify and how do we get these books back and how do we follow up on these overdues and these fines, and that realizing that you're alienating your tax base. You're alienating the very people who are then going to be asked to vote on a millage or some sort of sustaining funding for their local public library system. And if the public, and for me in my head, I'm reading these very compelling arguments that the public library has decided it makes no financial sense to go after people who have, a lot of overdues or fines accumulated from lost materials. It just makes better financial sense to make sure we're not alienating the very people who would vote whether or not to sustain the funding that's going to our spaces. And I see that having this, like, for me, it took reading about this in the New York Times for me to go, oh, wait a minute, I'm doing the same thing in my school. I was like, oh. And that was brought to my attention not through a conversation with a school librarian. It was through reading about it in the public library discourse.
Our school district also eliminated fines for overdues and lost books. We are, again, very fortunate because each school library is given a budget to buy new books, and a portion of that is always expected to go toward replacing books that are lost or damaged.
I think it's fair to say that school library policies never happen in a vacuum. They are a product not just of the librarian who's in place, but for better or for worse, heavily shaped and determined by the expectations of teachers, the administration, our district writ large, and, to a certain extent, the families that we support.
I definitely got a lot of pushback from teachers when I first initiated having unrestricted checkout. They did not want their students to have to be responsible for as many books as they could carry. And I will say at first when I said you can take what you can be responsible for, that there was a big surge and some of my 5th and 6th graders were taking stacks of books, but they self-regulated. That didn't last for very long. They realized they only really needed 1 or 2 books a week, especially if they were getting longer chapter books. And I think that that's what makes it possible to do this, are those one-on-one conversations that you have with students about what is reasonable, and why it's important, that the books are a shared resource for all of the students in the school. And if they have some that are at home, but they're not reading them, that means someone else doesn't get to. And students are reasonable. They usually will take that to heart, and they just building that relationship with them makes it possible. What were you going to say, Maura?
So I was going to say that, yes, the policies are a product of, what's going on in your district, right? So our district, we actually have policy in place, school library policy, that states that you may not restrict checkout for students. You may not block checkout for students for fines or overdue books. Some school librarians in our district are still not following that. But as far as your school level, the librarian as the expert, it's on you to educate your principal, educate your teachers, educate your families in what is best practices, right? So you need to think about and go in. I would say if you're going to make a change, if you want to make a change at your school, you want to definitely schedule an appointment with your principal. And you want to go in with support as to why it's best practices to have an unrestricted checkout policy. You can refer to Kim and my articles, but there's also ALA and AASL policy statements that will back you up.
Open, unrestricted, and equitable, right? The ALA says open, unrestricted, and equitable access to libraries books.
So you want to make sure that you have your principal on board before you talk to your teachers and your families. And each year, I wrote a letter that clearly outlined the policies, the unrestricted policies, and, as far as students could choose the number of books they needed to check out each week, and that students, even if they had overdue books, they could continue to check out, and the reasoning behind it. So that I had that support and I had it written and I front loaded each year the teachers. So the teachers in my school knew the policy. I also sent that letter home to families so they understood. I did give families the option of if they wanted to place, at the elementary level, if they wanted to place a number on the number of books their students could check out, right? Because there are some families where they're like, I've got 3 kids, I think 2 books a week is enough, right? So I would just put a little note in that child's file or record in Destiny saying 2-book limit. But when the student would come up to me, they would come up with, say, 3 books. And I would say, you remember, Mom only wants you to take 2 books. So I would always refer back to the parent and not be the police woman on that.
And I had that happen as well. And I would let the student take 3 books, but tell them they needed to leave one of them in the classroom.
Interesting. There's so many things I want to follow up on. First of all, it does occur to me that, again, when we have policies, we also have to recognize that our schools are also lending entities, meaning when our schools start at the beginning of the school year, there are supplies, materials, think about all the things that our schools also lend out in terms of musical instruments, in terms of textbooks, in terms of uniforms. And I'm thinking that in the larger context, I think that it's important to recognize that our lending policies also in the larger school environment, you have to be cognizant that, I'm aware of our textbook lending policies because they also use Destiny. And every once in a while, kids try and return their textbooks to me. And I'm like, no, that goes to the book room for the main office. But I'm aware that those policies do not have to necessarily impact the policies I have, but they might be very distinct because our schools might have very different approaches to like, hey, if you haven't returned your football helmet that was issued to you, that might be something that has to be addressed through, obviously your athletic department. If you broke that cello, let's try to recognize that when we're talking about books, our policy may be more open to negotiation than, say, some of these sort of larger ticket items. I don't know. I'm speaking just as a person who's aware. Every once in a while, our football helmets go missing, and I found out how much they cost to replace.
The other thing, Maura said, you talk to the teachers, you educate them. There's so much research that shows that the way that students become readers, that there are these certain factors, and one of them is having books at home. One of them is having books that they choose. One of them is having a certain number of books. One of them is seeing other adults reading. There's just this long list of like the top 10 things that will turn your child into a reader. We want to share that with parents and teachers and make sure, this is good for our students. We're not teaching them responsibility. We're teaching them to love books and reading and libraries, and that will serve them throughout their lives.
So one thing I also wanted to say is our policies are super important because librarians control book access for a whole school, right? So our policies are super important, and they're not talked about very often, if at all. For many of our students, the school library is their only library, right? Even in middle class and upper middle class schools, a lot of those parents are not going to the public library, right? So if a student cannot check out books or cannot check out enough books from the school library, it means that they don't have pleasure reading material. They're restricted just to what the teacher assigns. And you all know that does not promote a love of reading. You might be a proficient reader, but that doesn't mean that that's something you'll choose to do for pleasure.
Right. In the library, our students can go beyond assignments and compliance, and they can really grow and thrive because they have that choice and because they get to read what they want.
I know I've said this before, but when it talks about, just expecting that the kids can always go to the public library, it is such an assumption that really can really do a disservice when it comes to our communities. In my personal experience, my neighborhood district, 2 of our main library branches are actually physically attached to the schools that they are there. So the original library branch was contained in the school, and the students would be looking at library books not in a school library, but in the neighborhood library because it was attached to their school. And so you realize, you're like, wait, our schools and our libraries, if they're not close together. My own high school is over 2 miles from the branch library of my neighborhood. So my neighborhood that I support has one library, and it is close to 3 miles away from my school. And so our students are not going to be walking to the library after school to get the books that they want. It's a beautiful library. It's a gorgeous library. It's amazing, but it is almost 3 miles away. So no, I mean, that kind of assumption is really going to shortchange our students. So let's go ahead. Let's talk about the beginnings of this investigation, and that had its start in Salt Lake City during AASL 2021.
I don't know how we got on the topic, but we were talking about book checkout, and I mean, it might have been, I'm in a lot of librarian Facebook groups, and it might have been that somebody was posting about, they were very frustrated with students messing up I think there might have been one messing up the graphic novels. So, students were not going to be allowed to check out graphic novels. And actually, I don't know if this is the same time or if this was afterwards. There's a great article by Ashley Hawkins where one line is something like, you can't wear a t-shirt that says, I read banned books one day, and then put your graphic novels on vacation the next. So we got to talking, and, I said, I know that there are librarians in our county who are, restricting checkout or blocking checkout completely if students have overdue books, or saying, oh, you're in first grade, you can have one book, and, well, you didn't return that book the following week, even though the book was not overdue, so you can't check out any more books. And we were really curious. We're like, well, is it just our area, or is it what's going on in the rest of the country? So we created this personal research project, and we did 2 different Google surveys. One was aimed towards school librarians, and the other was aimed at former students, right? We had to do 18 and older because we didn't want to have to get parental permission to have current students survey it. So we had 496 school librarians from 47 states and 9 countries responded. And we had 205 former students who had some very passionate memories, both positive and negative, about their former school library experiences. And I don't know, Kim, do you want to talk more about our discoveries in our survey? A little bit about that?
Sure. Well, we definitely heard from the students, that was what was most powerful to me, because they talked about the fact that they were embarrassed, that they didn't want to be there, that they were afraid of their librarian. How terrible to be a librarian and have a student be afraid of you, afraid to come and tell you that something happened to their book or that they didn't know where it went. To me, that was just, it made me really, really look closely and think, this has to be told to people. They need to take a critical look, because we don't want that to, we know no librarians want their students to be afraid to come and talk to them. So that was a big part of it. We were surprised at how much more restrictive it was for the younger students. They were the ones that could check out the least number of books. They're also the ones that are reading very short books that don't take a lot of time to read, and then they wouldn't have an opportunity to check out again until a week or 2 later. And so they, I guess, could read the same book over and over again. Or I used to say they could come before or after school, but a lot of my kids were bus riders, so they didn't really have that access before and after school to do that. And it really made me take a look and think about, okay, what are these barriers that are stopping us from getting those books in the students' hands, because it's happening all the time. Go ahead, Maura.
So the K through 2 was the most restrictive. We did notice that over 90% of participants restrict the number, and it's often correlated to the age. So kindergartners were allowed to check out 1 book. First graders, 1 book, maybe 2 books. Second graders, 2 books. And K through 2, that's when we should just be inundating our students with books, right? Because they are learning to read, And not only are they learning to read, they're learning to love books and love reading. So imagine being told, sorry, you don't get to check out. Or sorry, you can't check out that book. That book's too hard for you. Or sorry, you can only check out books from this section of the library. Amy, imagine going to the public library and I said to you, Amy, you may only choose 2 books. It must be on your reading level. And then if you brought up a book that you thought was fun, I said, no, that's too hard for you. Go put that back. You can't read that.
Or if you brought a book that you plan to read with your big sister, that maybe it was too hard for you, but that doesn't mean you didn't have somebody at home that would look at it with you, or that doesn't mean that you might, it might be aspirational. Maybe you want to eventually be able to read that big, thick book.
Yeah, I had an experience at my school with a 2nd grade teacher who did not agree with my policies at all. And she would send kids back and they would say, my teacher says this book is too hard for me. And it would break my heart because I knew that the teacher had communicated that in front of the whole class. So super embarrassing. And, so I would have the conversation with the students, say, you can still keep that book. If you want to check out another book, that's fine. And then I had a private conversation with the teacher later. And I said, you cannot tell them that these books are too hard. You cannot tell them what they can choose for pleasure reading. And she would say, he checked out Harry Potter. He can't read Harry Potter. He just wants to put it on his desk and so he looks cool. And I said, shouldn't we be celebrating that he thinks like having a big book is cool? Isn't that what we want? Maybe he's going to read a little bit of it. You have no idea. We'd have the opposite happening, where they'd say, well, this book is too easy. I need to get a harder book. It happened less like the longer I was at my school and I knew the teachers. So I'd have to have less and less of those conversations. I thought I was done with that when I went to the secondary school. But actually, I had something happen just a couple of weeks ago. I work at a fabulous school. The English teachers are really on board with choice reading. So the students are all encouraged to check out books that they want to read. And then I'm not sure if it's every class or, 1 or 2 classes a week. There's a certain amount of time where they read silently, right? Their books they chose. So also during that time, if they need to return a book and check out a new book, they're coming to the library. So this one boy came in and he's, checked out a book. I checked it out. He comes back 5 minutes later with the book. I said, what's the matter? He said, my teacher said I have to return this book. She doesn't believe I'm interested in it. And I said, well, why? And I said, are you interested in it? He said, yes, I really am. And I said, well, why would she think you're not interested in it? And he said, well, a couple of my friends were laughing. He goes, can she tell me I can't read this book? And I said, no, she can't tell you what book you can or can't read or what book you're interested in. I said, but, I'm going to kind of give her the benefit of the doubt and say, your friends were laughing and maybe she did think that you were, not interested in this book. So I said, well, what do you want to do? Do you want to get another book? And he said, no. I said, here's what I think you should do. I said, if I was in elementary school, I would have a conversation with your teacher. But I think that you're old enough and mature enough that you can go and have this conversation on your own. So I kind of schooled him up and I said, wait until after class, talk with her privately and just explain that you really are interested in this book and that, she embarrassed you. I told him to, be respectful and just state your case. I said that this will be a good experience for you to stand up for yourself, but also it will help future students so that she'll think twice before, making an assumption. And I said, well, the joke would be on you if you picked a book that you're not interested in, because A, you either have to read a book you're not interested in, or you have to pretend to read a book you're not interested in. So he did come back later. And he said that he was successful. He talked to the teacher and he explained, and she said that he could read the book.
Your articles that you have written have really asked us to challenge our past practices and what we're going to do moving forward. But it really does tackle some difficult questions that call for some introspection, but also for some difficult conversations we may have to have with our administration and our teachers. So let's look at, when we specifically limit the number of books a student can check out. And in my mind, I'm thinking about like the total number of books and also, and I'm guilty of this, series books, because I would have students who would come in and want to check out book 1, book 2, book 3. And for me, I had a hard time with that. But I also was very aware that like you said earlier, I have teachers for whom when my students would check out books, it was interesting because the books would come back in a basket. And I would praise the teacher and I'd say, hey, you do an amazing job of making sure these books are all back in ready for our next library day. How do you do that? And the teacher's like, well, these books never go home. And I was like, wait, so these were pre-K and kindergarten teachers. And they'd bring up their milk crate and all the books were in there. And I'd sort of scratch my head and I said, how do you manage to get all of the books back on your library day? Because in this school, we had an A day, B day, C day, D day, which was, I'm telling you right now, you want to confuse our families? Have an A day, B day, C day, D day. Because all of a sudden, it's not that library's on Thursdays. It's on a C day. Well, what day is it? I don't know. We have to go look at the school calendar. That is nutty, friends. That is nutty.
All right. So when I was in the elementary school, here's what I would do. Before students would look for books, which, by the way, I am a fan and I highly advocate, let all the students look for books at the same time. I know it's some librarians say, okay, the kids at this table can go look for books. And then the kids at that table. What happens is then the kids who go first, they get the best pick of books. Seems just so unfair to me. So before I would unleash my class on the stacks, which, yes, it can be a little bit chaotic. That's okay. I would say, okay, let's sit down. Let's have a really mindful moment. Think about how many books do you still have checked out at home that you still haven't read? All right, think about all the things you have to do after school this week, right? Well, how much time are you going to have to read? Think about, are you working on a project and maybe you need to get a book for that project? Think about what kinds of books you want to look for today. And you think about how many books you need, not how much you want. How many books do you need this week? And then they would go to look for their books. The one rule is they needed to be able to comfortably carry them without dropping them. And I also did have the rule that they could only take out one book from each series, because it's super unfair if one kid gets like 5 Dogman books and then other kids don't get any. But they understand that, right? They understand that that's fair. Also, I would usually say, depending on how many books I had on a topic, like sharks or, dinosaurs, you can't take out 6 books on dinosaurs and then other kids don't have any. So they would really understand that. And I didn't worry about what they had checked out or what books they had overdue. When you're making your policies, you want to make policies, you make them for the 90%, but so many people make their policies for that 10%, that 10% of students who don't return their books on time, which is just so unfair.
Yeah. And I was going to say, I did get pushback from teachers who didn't want to have their students be responsible for a whole stack of books and things, but they said, well, how do you even have time to shelve them? What are you thinking? It's going to be hard. But for me, if they would bring them back and they would end up on a shelving cart instead of on the shelves, that was okay, because those were the popular books that they would go there and look first, for one thing. And also, I don't think that the convenience of the adults in the school building should have priority over what's best for our students. It just has to be, this is best for the students, for them to have books and be surrounded by books. So that was the line I would use with teachers, and it usually got through to them.
Right. So when we did talk and in this survey, there was a place to write in, if you do have restrictive policies, what is the reason behind it? And also in conversations with other librarians. Their main reservations around, going unrestricted is not being able to just handle the influx of books that have been returned, right? Not being able to handle shelving all the books. Books going missing. So either, and I had a very transient school. Kids would move all the time, and sometimes they would move with your books. Or, and books never being returned. Or not having enough books to have a variety of books for students. But the reality is, it's maybe if you go from a severely restrictive policy to unrestricted, you might have some kids being like, I'm going to check out as many books as I can carry at first. But it really does level off. Honestly, in one of the articles, I have some graphs where one week I charted first grade classes and fifth grade classes. And the majority of students at the elementary level would check out under 5 books each week. Some just 1 or 2. I mean, there would be the outliers who would get 10 or 12 or something like that. And then I would also have a conversation as I would say, do you really need all these books? I also had conversations because I did have, teachers who were very much on board and trying to support the policy. And I had one third grade teacher who's a good friend of mine. And she came to me, she said, this one student has so many books in the classroom. I had to get her, they're not fitting in her desk or her book box. I had to get her an extra crate. And I said, okay, well, this is getting into a hoarding situation now. So I said, send this student to me. And I said to her, honey, you have 33 books checked out right now. There is no way you are reading 33 books at the same time. I said, this is called hoarding, right? So all the books that are sitting in your crate, you're not reading them, but also no one else can read them because they're sitting there. So so we agreed. And she's like, yeah, I understand. So I said, here's what I want you to do. Go back to your classroom. Take the books that you are reading right now, put them aside. Take 1 or 2 books that you are going to read within the next week, put those aside. Everything else return. I had an open library every morning and basically open library all day where students could come to the library for the first 20 minutes every morning. And also teachers could send kids at any time during the day. So it's not like, I can only come and check out during my library time and then come back. So I said, you can always come and get these books again. I also sometimes I would have students. I had one girl, Lucy, who loved books, loved reading. She lived in 2 different houses and she didn't have the best executive functioning skills. And so she would come with a big stack of books every single week. And I'd say, Lucy, you have 6 Dork Diary books checked out right now. You are not reading 6 Dork Diary books at the same time. So sometimes what I would say is, okay, pick one today, returns. I'm going to hold all of these on my desk with your name on it. Please return some of these books because there are kids, like some of these books have holds on them. Kids are waiting to read them. But honestly, those conversations and situations were few and far between. Like those are really not the majority of my students. Sometimes I'd have to have conversations with parents and say, hey, can you, there's a lot of books out. Can you get those books back? But the majority of the time, students were returning books on time.
Can I just say to the listening audience right now, if you happen to be in library school right now, and I know you are, because I hear from people who are both in a school library actively, and also working on getting their master's in library science or a certificate in library science. But if you are also enrolled in classes to become a certified school librarian, would you really consider bringing this episode to the attention of an instructor who is working with you on getting your library certificate or degree? Friends, this kind of conversation is one that should have happened as part of my education, and it didn't. And I think that if you happen to be working on a degree and are an aspiring individual who will be spending the rest of your educational career, the rest of your working career in school libraries, would you please consider sharing this episode with other people in your class, your instructors, and with other people who are important to you in your library circles? Because it is this kind of conversation that is lacking because we work in silos. We work in spaces where we are the only librarian we will encounter until we go to our next state or national conference. And for so often, this is the kind of deep dive that really sort of instigated or motivated me to have this community, to build this listening community, because I couldn't have this conversation with colleagues. If one of my teachers came in, it would be very hard for me to work through the nuance of an unrestricted checkout and to question my book policies from a perspective of other school librarians who would also be able to fall back on those lived experiences that they've had in their spaces. Can I just go back to this idea of equity and your morning checkouts versus your afternoon checkouts? Because I'm thinking about when those book shipments came in and those brand new books were being revealed to my students for the very first time. I remember being very mindful that I had a cart I would distribute our new books and put them out on displays, and I would have an AM display and those books set aside. And about half of that shipment was not going to be seen for the first time until my afternoon classes came out, because you absolutely know that those first hour students, those second hour students, they were going to get dibs on the brand new, fresh out of the box book shipments. And our afternoon kids, because especially if you're in a fixed schedule where those rotation of classes are very arbitrary. So I would only see certain grade levels at certain times. There was no way they were going to see the new books if I let all of those out during my first class or my second class visiting.
So Amy, I would do the same thing but I would even do it each day that week. Right? Because the worst thing is to be your Friday afternoon checkout. There's nothing left, right? All the most popular books. I also encourage students to put holds on books a lot for the more popular ones. And that kind of helped with equity. One more thing I wanted to talk, just cycling back to the whole equity idea. When you're making your policies, I would talk to some librarians and they'd say, well, but then if I knew that they would return the books, then I would probably let them check out a little bit more. And I thought, well, that's really inequitable. Like if you feel that your policy, you have to make exceptions to your policy regularly, then you need to rethink that policy. Because the policy should be in place for everybody.
And on that subject, like the students who don't have great executive functioning skills, or the students who don't have support at home to help them remember that it's Wednesday and they need to bring their book back, they shouldn't be punished, or they shouldn't, it shouldn't be a negative thing for them that they don't have as many opportunities then to check out. It does need to be equitable. And so just because they don't have the support they might need in order to remember to bring that book back doesn't mean that they shouldn't be allowed to get more books.
Right. One of the things that I loved about being an elementary school librarian is really getting to know my students and seeing their growth from preschool or kindergarten through grade 5. And, there were some students who every year they had overdue books. Every year they lost books. And then it would click. Sometimes it was in 3rd grade. Sometimes it would take some students till 5th grade. And I would say, okay, what's your plan this year? Because last year, you lost a couple of books. What's the plan this year for you to make sure that you're getting your books back in time and you're not losing them and all that. And then I would compliment them when I noticed that, okay, they've got a handle on it. And I'd say, wow, Isak, you used to have kind of a hard time getting your books back, when they were due and all of this, but now you're returning your books on time all the time. I'm so proud of you. And you could just see the like pleasure and just how good it made them feel. So the school library is a safe place for students to practice, right? They need to practice responsibility. And, if you say you can check out 2 books, you take away their independence, right? Students need to learn to become independent choosers of their own pleasure reading material. So the more restrictions you place, I know some librarians will say, you can take 1 fiction and 1 nonfiction, or you can take, 1 fiction book and 1 graphic novel. It really inhibits the students' development as far as, their independence and their ability to try new things. Right? Imagine if you only can take 2 books. I would feel so much pressure. I'm the type of person who goes to the library and I come home with 10 books and then maybe I read 5. I'm also the kind of person where I'm reading 4 or 5 books at the same time. But I would feel so much pressure to choose the perfect book. And then, what if you chose badly? Right? Sucks for you. You've got a boring book to read for the next week. Or what probably happens is you just don't read, right? And that's what's happening.
I do want to make sure that there's one more thing that it occurred when we were putting together the questions for today's conversation, that some of these questions are uncomfortable because it requires the listeners to really do some introspection and consider, what do we do when we run the spaces that we do and the kinds of policies which shape the checkout which we oversee. And I'm concerned because, student behavior in our space can be a challenge because we work with every student in the school. And I sometimes equated library as, recess with bookshelves, because oftentimes you get some students for whom their special is when they work out. It's the first time they're getting out of their desks. And so you get these kids for whom that time is sometimes recess, but sometimes it's their special. And if it's gym, well, that's fantastic. But if it's library, they're coming up and there is a sort of an energy that sometimes gets used in our spaces. And it can be very difficult because we are also trying to, exemplify some of the behaviors that happen in our spaces. But let's speak for a minute as to what happens when a student's behavior is then reflected in whether or not they get to check out books.
So this is something that I've seen posted on Facebook groups, and also other librarians, I think, in our county have done at times, that if students are badly behaved, then they are not allowed to check out books. So book checkout is a right. It's not a privilege. And really, the punishment should fit the crime. So a lot of times at the elementary school librarian, as you say, Amy, it is a special, right? And it should be, right? So we want to look at, what are our expectations, right? Maybe those kids have been sitting quietly for hours. So if you are expecting them to then, again, sit quietly for 20 minutes and listen to you read a book, maybe that's not developmentally appropriate, but also maybe you want to give them a little bit more freedom. So just cycling back to when I said I would let my whole class check out at once. And it would be kind of chaotic. And every single time, kids would run. Every single time, kids would run. And my response to that would be, okay, Johnny, you were running. Please come sit down. So Johnny would come and sit down. After a minute, I'd say, are you ready to try again? Yes. Johnny would go, and I wouldn't be mad. I wouldn't be yelling. I'd just say, please sit right here by my circulation desk in this chair. And then Johnny would try again. Johnny's running again. I'd say, Johnny, you're running again. Please sit down in the chair. So my kind of guideline is if they're running, they'd have to sit down, try again. If they're running again, they have to wait till everyone else is done checking out, right? Because before they choose their books and check out. A lot of times, students are going to make noise and act up, and that's normal for elementary school students. Go ahead, Kim.
I was going to say, libraries are not meant to be quiet spaces. There's that stereotype or that preconceived notion that they're quiet spaces. That's not the case. We want it to be a place where students express their ideas. And I just ask librarians to look at it through the lens of, put yourself in your students' shoes. They have been sitting quietly. Maybe you start your library lesson with some kind of movement activity where they're doing a cross-body thing, or you're singing a song, or you're doing movements and things to kind of help them feel more settled and establish that routine. And also keep in mind that misbehavior is communication. They're telling you something. So there could be a reason for that. And again, just really always trying to look at it with that student-centered, focus. This is, if I were them, why would I be doing this?
Yeah. And I know when I talk to elementary librarians, being cognizant of what was leading up to them coming to your space. So are they coming in from a recess? Are they coming in from a rest time? Are they coming in from, a meal like lunch or snack? Or what is it that preceded them coming to your space? And then remember that, because these kiddos have just woken up from their rest time. These kiddos have just finished their meal, or these kiddos, like you said, have been sitting at their desks working on math problems for the last 45 minutes. So yeah, you absolutely have to put that in context for sure. It may be obvious to some by now, but I think it's important to discuss the benefits of having an unrestricted checkout, because it really is, for some people, this would require a considerable adjustment to the practices that they currently have in place. So let's talk about that a little bit.
For me, it's all about relationship building. You are being the one who makes them feel heard and listened to and seen when they come to the library. It's a welcoming space. So when they can, when they have that choice to pick out the books and the number of books and that they want and they feel that they need, you're giving them voice and choice. And that is so vital for students' growth.
You also get better behavior, right? If students think of the library and the librarian in a positive light, you're going to have happier, better behaved students. You're also it saves time for the librarian, right? Because I know a lot of librarians will have the students bring the books to return with them when they come to the library, and then they stand there and check the books in before the kids can check out to make sure that, you actually can check out books. Right. So it either takes time away from the lesson to do that, or you're printing out a list of books like I used to do, printing out a list of books. So that also takes time. So that's more time for the librarian, less kind of tedious things you need to do. But also it's all the positive things that we've been talking about as far as, students developing a love of reading and critical thinking skills.
One of the favorite things that we do in our county is the high school seniors during graduation week. They come back to their elementary school in their graduation gowns and they walk the halls, and the teachers come back. And I've had, students come up and say, remember when, we did a Newberry Club, or remember that. And I had a student come up, remember when my dog ate that library book and you didn't get mad? They remember those positive interactions that they have with you, and they take that with them when they go. And again, that relationship building, you are a safe space for them. And you hope that libraries will continue to be a safe space for them for the rest of their lives.
Let us know, because when we know better, we do better. What can school librarians do to manage this transition? What are some of the strategies that would ease this shift towards unrestricted checkout? Because I appreciate that on Monday, it's not like people are going to just walk right in and say, hey, I have a great idea. The reality is that some of this is going to require a little bit of background and a little bit of legwork before you do this and want to implement this kind of change. Maura.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, you can make change at any time in your library. I know sometimes we think, oh, I'm going to have to wait until the start of the new school year. No. I would say do it on a trial basis, right? First off, talk to your principal. Say, listen, I listened to this podcast, I read these articles, and I'm really wanting to try unrestricted checkout. I think this is going to be something that's good for our school and good for our students, and it's going to help improve student reading scores because everything does, right? So principals want to know the bottom line. Just say, I want to do it on a trial basis. I would say give it probably a couple of months to really see the effects. And if it, and you could say if it doesn't work out, then you go back. But it may work out. And so this is interesting. After our articles posted, I had a school librarian from New York State email me, and she said, I think she was at a couple of different schools, and she said, there's no way I could do this, right? And I said, okay, I understand your concerns. And she had legitimate reasons. Like she thought it would just be too much. She didn't have assistants and all of this. And by the way, when I was an elementary school librarian, I was a solo librarian. I had no volunteers and I had no assistant. So every book that came in and came out, I was in charge of shelving it. And we had, I want to say, just over 400 students. And my circulation was anywhere from 36,000 to 37,000 books a year. So I was checking in and checking out 200 to 300 books every day. And it was manageable. I was able to do it. And I was also on the master's schedule for close to 20 hours a week. So anyway, I digress. So the school librarian, I said, well, why don't you just try it? I understand your concerns, but you could try it on a trial basis and you may be surprised. It may work out. So she tried it. And then she emailed me back and she said, you know what? I tried it and it did work. It worked. And then funny, I was up in New York State and I was doing a 1-day PD workshop for the school librarians in a county up there. And part of the day was spent on this equity reflection. And I used this example. And that librarian was at the workshop. I said, wow, this is a small world. First, yes, I would do it on a trial basis, get your principal's support, talk to teachers, talk to families, talk to students, try it out. And then ways to get the books back, because that is a lot of people are worried, how am I getting those books back? I had rolling carts. I bought rolling carts for every one of my classroom teachers, and students got in the habit of every day. So we wouldn't wait just till library day to bring your book back. Whenever you finished a book, you bring it back, you put it in the cart, and every day those carts would come down. So I would get books back. I had an outdoor book return bin so that parents could come up and, parents would be like, oh, she's got 12 books to return. So they would come up and maybe after school or when they would pick it up and they'd put them in the outdoor book return bin. I also had a receipt printer hooked up to my Destiny. So if a child had overdue books, I would print it out. I would highlight the books that were overdue and I would stick it in the book. Now, at the middle school and high school level, we do something which I really wish that I had known about this in elementary school because I think it's genius. On the back of our books, we have a sticker, a due date sticker, and there's a stamp. And after the students check their books out, they stamp it with the due date. So many times in elementary school, the kids didn't know when the books were due, right? The parents had no idea when the books are due. Imagine being able to look at the back of the book and say, oh, that's when it's due.
Yeah. And I think that just thinking ahead of time about what the barriers might be, what makes it hard for students to do it. In one of the middle schools that I was supporting, they would do a locker clean out, at the end of each quarter. And the librarian always made sure she was there with a cart so that when the kids found a book in the bottom of their locker, she could grab it right away. Or just being there, at the doors as the kids enter, they would see me and they would hand me books. That was fine. Anything, part of it is it might stay in their backpack for 3 weeks because they're not remembering to bring it to the library, but they are trying to get it back to school. So just making it easy for them to do it, removing barriers is the biggest thing. So think ahead of time. What are those barriers going to be? What's going to make it hard for kids to return their books? And then eliminate them if you can.
We are concerned about getting books back, right? A lot of people need to be fiscally responsible, right, if those books are missing. But it's much easier to replace a book than to rebuild a child's trust in the library.
I think I wrote an article with that title for a School Library Connection way back when they used to publish.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the phrase I've seen on social media is I'd rather lose a book than lose a reader. Yes. Maura, what would you say to listeners who don't have annual budgets, who are justifiably worried that these books won't come back and they won't be able to replace them? Do you have students pay for lost books?
Amy, that's a great question and a real concern. I completely understand that. I used to have students pay for books when they lost the books. And what I found would happen often is the students would pay for the books and then I would find the book either on my own bookshelves or it would be, often when they're cleaning out the classroom at the end of the year, the books are in their desk or they are on the teacher's bookshelves. Like that's often where we would find those books that have been overdue for quite some time. So then it was a problem of having to refund the money for the book, and it was a big hassle. So I ended up just waiting until the end of the year. Actually, I did not mark any books lost until the end of the year. Often, if the students were going to return in the fall, I wouldn't even mark them lost until the fall. So, I would check out anywhere from 36,000, 37,000 books each year. And honestly, I'd usually end the year with under 70 that had not come back. And a lot of those would come back in the fall. There was that issue with having kids pay for books. So my old school was, it was borderline Title I. And actually this year they did become a Title I school. So we did have a lot of students on free and reduced lunch. And my principal and I talked about it, and we decided we were going to stop charging students for books that had been lost. So when I would send out the notices at the end of the year, I would leave off the amount of the book, right? I would leave off the cost of the book. There'd be the picture of the front cover, the title, the author, and all that. Some parents would ask. They would want to replace the book. So if a parent did ask, I would say that they could buy a replacement copy, and it didn't have to be a brand new copy because let's face it, a lot of times the books that are not coming back are pretty old, and oftentimes they were books that were going to be weeded anyway. I would say they could buy a good condition replacement book, and that would be acceptable, or they could pay for the books. Because we are such a large county, we do have a very transient population of students. So sometimes I would get students who were coming from other schools in the county, and they would have books that they still owed to that other library. So what I would do is I would say, hey, welcome to our library. I see you still have some library books from your old school. Do you have them at your house? And if they did, I would say, okay, well, why don't you go ahead and bring them in and I will send them back to your old library for you. A lot of times parents, they don't want the hassle of driving back to the old school. So we have an inter-school mail system. I could just send them back to the other school. If they said that the books had been left at the other school, which happened a lot, or that they were lost, I would email that other librarian and say, hey, I've asked for these books. I don't think they're coming back. Can you please take them off this child's record? And vice versa, if I had kids going to another school, I would contact that librarian and say, hey, you're getting so-and-so. They're a great kid, but they left with these books. Can you ask them if they have them? And if they do, send them back to me. for students who were moving on, so our fifth graders who were going from elementary to middle school, I would clear their record at the end of the year. And this is actually county policy, so that when they go to their new school, they would start fresh. Because what we were finding is that sometimes kids would get ready to go and graduate from high school, and if there are any fines on their record, they can't actually walk in graduation until those fines are released. So there were some kids who still owed money for books that they had lost in elementary school. So we've put a stop to this practice. Also, what I do is I would go to all of the classrooms like those last 2 weeks and visit and just kind of say, hey, anybody got books, and kind of follow up individually with students.
I was going to add to that because I think that there are so many creative ways to get the books back. And again, just making it easy for the students to do it. So you make yourself really visible and you make them very aware that you're looking for the books. So we used to start every morning news show with a funny meme during the last few weeks of school. Like we would say, have a picture of Batman and it would say, Batman returns his library books or something like that. We had a big poster of Indiana Jones in the front hall that said, Return the Adventure. And there was a book basket there. And we would just have like an ongoing list of the funniest places someone found a library book this week. And the kids could add to the whiteboard the funny place where they found their library book. And we would sometimes do incentives, like the class that returned all their books might have a popsicle party, or a teacher, a favorite coach or a teacher would come to their classroom to do a read aloud. But we did find we didn't want to single anyone out. And, if there was one child in the class who hadn't returned a book, we didn't want anyone to be aware that child was there and they were going to be penalized. So we might do raffle tickets or something inside to make it more individualized and not do a whole class thing. Because again, it's really important to not make children feel bad for things that have happened. We have to give them grace. A book is never more valuable than your relationship with your individual students.
So Kim, I will tell you, in the beginning, I had the wall of shame, right? I did those whole class incentives. And I stopped doing it because the kids would get so fired up and they would know which kids did not return their books. Some would get very aggressive, and teachers would also kind of feel like they were being shamed if their class had not returned all of their books. So yeah, after my first year, I thought, okay, this is not a good idea.
Okay, so maybe leave that off. But I will say, you talked about going to the classroom. I think, again, just making yourself really visible. So if they were doing a locker cleanup, I would show up. Or I might go to the classroom for the younger kids dressed as Dr. Seuss, as a character from a book or something like that, just to get them excited about bringing those books back to the library. Or I might bring one of our hand puppets and have the hand puppet ask for the books to be returned. Just some silly stuff to really bring attention to the fact that we were looking for books. But yeah, going to their classrooms, I found is where I found most of them. They were on the teacher shelves or they were elsewhere.
I actually so Canon Kangro, she's recently been on your show, Amy. So she created this list of places to look for all of your lost library books. And some of them are so funny and silly, but it covers the whole front side of a page. And it's like, look in Taekwondo, look in your car, look in your aunt's car, look in your babysitter's car. Like, it's just this whole list of places where you can look for those lost library books. Like, look under the couch, look between your bed and the wall. Honestly, that's where a lot of the books are.
Well, I know when we have locker clean out, I usually bring a library cart down to the main hallways where the kids' lockers are, usually before a long holiday weekend or vacation, and just asking for library books.
One more thing about kids who are transferring, make sure you talk to the registrar or whoever in your office handles transfers and say, hey, when you find out that a kid is going to a new school, can you let me know so that I can see if they have any books they need to return? So that's really important. We don't always get prior notice. I mean, there are a lot of times where they come in, they're like, hey, last Friday was so-and-so's last day. In high school, at least in my high school, the kids have to come with a form and get a signature saying they've returned all their library books.
I was going to say, but they do come back. I've had kids mail me books from, Montana across the country when they moved because they found them, and somehow their librarian was able to, send them. So it didn't come, the parents didn't have to pay for the shipping, but
Well, and I will say my stickers, my school stickers on the inside of all of my books have our school name and our address, because I've gotten books back from, if you can believe it, hospitals and resorts. Well, it's just a 5160. It's just an Avery label, 5160. It's got our high school name. It's got the mailing address underneath it. And absolutely.
A lot of our books get returned to the public library, because we got new spine labels, and they look exactly like the public library, except it'll say like Fairfax County Public Schools instead of Fairfax County Public Library. And they eventually do make their way back. They send them to our central office, and then they get sent out to the schools.
Makes sense. Definitely makes sense. So, friends, I know that you are going to spark some very interesting conversations at the next PD meetings or gatherings of school librarians, or at the very least, you're going to cause a lot of people to sit down with a notebook and their own thoughts and give them reasons to question what it is that we do on a regular basis to build our readers' trust in the programs that we're creating, and what are we doing to give them reasons to be concerned or dread coming to our spaces. Would you let listeners know where they can reach out to you as, individually? Because invariably, when you bring up these sort of very strong feelings, it's possible somebody might want to reach out and further a part of what you might have said and ask you some more specific questions, or definitely for certain, read more what you have to say and follow you on social media.
Sure. I think I included my email address in the show notes. If you email me, I will respond. I will email you back. Also, I'm on Bluesky professionally.
And my email is there as well, library.sigle@gmail.com, and I will respond. Probably not as fast as Maura, but I will respond. And I am on Instagram. It's eco.kim.librarian.
Well, I'm really excited. I truly, friends, I think that this is foundationally such an important conversation that librarians, irrespective of where we are in our professions, as in our library journey, I think that we can always do better when we realize the ramifications of what it is we do every day and the impact that we have potentially on entire schools worth of students who are coming through our spaces each and every year. Kim, you owe me an episode when this book comes out. I'm going to be reaching out to Bloomsbury and letting them know. Maura, I am so excited. I hope our paths cross in the future. We have such an opportunity to grow from this conversation. Thank you, Maura. Thank you, Kim. And stay warm. It's the winter time, and I don't care where you are. It's cold.
It's snowing here right now.
Oh, snowing in Virginia. Oh, my goodness. Well, thank you, Maura. Thank you, Kim. And I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amy.
Friends, if you found this episode helpful, please share it out with your team, your PLN, and on social media. Be sure to follow on your favorite podcatcher so you'll never miss an episode. And if you really like listening today, consider leaving a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Reviews help others find us. If you're curious to know how often your state or country has been featured on the podcast, then simply click on the link which can be found in our show notes. Search title, author, state, and country, and do a Command F search. I hope this is the year you consider being a guest on the show. Please visit the FAQs in every episode and you'll realize just how easy it is. We all have something to share. Make 2026 your time to shine. The topic of our next episode is Librarians Equal Literacy, and my conversation with parent advocates Jenny Fox, Rachel Cohen, and Marissa Migdal. I hope you will tune in.